Hello everybody, welcome to class where I'm going to be showing you how to start a craft brewery without risking your life savings in 4-ish steps. This is Sam Core, the owner of Drumconrath Brewing Company. Before we get started, I'll be sharing a few links to different websites during this class, and I will be sending out a follow-up email with all that information, including a copy of these slides, so you don't need to feel like you need to take extensive notes. And you can focus on absorbing the information. Sound good? Okay, so I do recommend, before we get started here, shutting down any distractions during the class if possible. Turn off Facebook, your phone, put it on silent so you can focus on the information provided in this class and get the most value possible out of it this time. I'm actually going to be doing the exact same so that I can share literally as much information as I can within the next hour and a half so. And I tried to put everything that I wish I would have known before starting my own craft brewery into this class. So does that sound like a good plan? I hope it does. Let's go right ahead then. I also want to thank everyone that submitted their questions prior to the start of this training session. And just want to let you know that I'll be getting to each one of those questions and responding to those at the end of the class, so be sure to stick around for those. I do, again, expect the class to last between 60 and 90 minutes for us to complete. So let's dive right in. Now, before I get going into the meat of the class, there's something I need to get off my chest right away. If you've been concerned in the past that you can't succeed in the craft brewing business, I want to put those fears and concerns to rest for you right this minute. You can do this. I'm happy to report that building a successful brewery is not even close to what I would describe as rocket science, but there are a lot of steps and hoops that you need to jump through in the beginning stages of this business that I'm going to outline in today's class. And I also want to assure you that none of these steps are complex by any means. There just happens to be a lot of them. People have been starting breweries for hundreds of years, and if you consistently keep taking steps toward your goal, one step at a time, you will be able to reach it. It's sort of like going to college, right? You start out as a wide-eyed freshman not knowing anything, but you stick around a few years, complete each class one at a time successfully, and then at the end of that 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, you look back and say, hey, that wasn't that hard. And trust me, if I can start a brewery, that means you can too. I definitely don't have any superpowers. And since this class could last up to 90 minutes, I want to be sure you actually want to be here. My goal for this presentation is to help two types of people. First, those of you just starting out or thinking about the idea of starting a craft brewery. You'll get a clear perspective on what it's like to operate and own a craft brewery, what it costs, so that you've got a clear idea of what it's actually going to require from a financial standpoint, what it's like to operate on a daily basis. And after this class, you might even decide that starting a brewery is not the right choice for you. And that is totally okay. You want to know whether or not it's the right choice before you invest money into this type of business. That is for sure. It's also for what I would describe as people that are further along in their journey. Maybe you've already started drafting your business plan. You've got recipes that you know that you want to use to sell in your brewery. And for those folks, I'm going to be definitely giving you my personal recipe for success for operating a craft brewery. Finally, I should also point out this presentation is not for anyone hoping to get rich quick or a simple push button way to start their brewery. As one of my brewing friends put it, when I was just getting started, starting a brewery will take twice as long as you think and cost 3 times as much as you think it will. I don't think it's quite as bad as my friend describes it, and this class will definitely help you get started on a budget. But this training is intended to start a real business with the long term in mind, and building a brewery is certainly not a get-rich-quick endeavor, I am sorry to say. Now, there's one other point I really hope to impress on you during this presentation. You need an apprenticeship, mentorship, or ideally a combination of both. As mentioned earlier, there are a lot of steps to getting started with a craft brewery, and getting a teacher is going to really speed up your goals a lot faster. Things are going to happen easier, and it's going to give you much better odds of business success in the end. They'll help you identify basically the next step that you need to take along the way. So this is definitely something that if you haven't thought about finding a mentor yet, you should start thinking about that process now. There's this famous quote from a gentleman by the name of Jim Rohn that says, "You are the average of the 5 people around you that you hang out with the most." And basically all that means is if you want to accomplish something, you need to surround yourself with people that have already done the things that you want to accomplish. So surrounding yourself with other folks that have already started a brewery is the fastest way to accomplish this goal, and is a great way to approach just about any really big challenge in your life for that matter. Before we dive into class, would it be all right with you guys if I share just a little bit of background about myself so that you know where I'm coming from and what gives me the qualifications to be actually holding a class about starting a brewery in the first place? FYI, I plan to share a few of my own stories and experiences in this class to highlight some of the different steps needed to start your own brewery, and I hope that my experiences help the lessons stick in your mind a little bit better. So first off, my name is Sam Core. I am the owner and founder of drumconrath Brewing Company based out of Mapleton, North Dakota, just about 13 miles west of Fargo, North Dakota, if you happen to know where that is. In late 2016, we officially sold our first keg of beer and have continued to grow each month since that point. We typically carry 8 beers on tap at this point and try to approach beers with an Irish flair, but also serve some light beers because that's frankly what a lot of people like to drink here in North Dakota. That being said, our Ribbon Man Red is our most popular beer on tap, and I'm always experimenting with seasonal varieties that are offered for a limited time. Like so many other breweries, I think my story began well before opening the doors to our 2,160 square foot location. This business had extremely humble beginnings and started extremely small and still is small, although I'm got a lot of plans to grow it over the next 1 to 3 years. For about 10 years, I would describe myself as an avid brewer. I got started with a really cheap Mr. Beer kit for under $100. The taste was pretty terrible and the mix wasn't even really your own, which left me unsatisfied with the process. So I went back to the home brewing store in my town and I started asking how I could brew styles of beers that I preferred, like reds specifically. And I ended up purchasing a roaster pan and stock pots at my own homebrew store and started to come up with my own recipes from there. After that, I guess, as they say, the rest is history, and I was completely hooked on home brewing, testing out new recipes, developing my own recipes. Maybe some of you on this class can relate with that similar story of getting started. Eventually, I started sharing my different home brews with just friends and family for fun. And during this time period, I, would daydream, I guess, about going pro as a brewer. But I never really took any steps to make it happen over that time. To be completely honest, it's something that I wanted to do, but I had something just really, really powerful holding me back at the time. Fear of losing my job, not being able to raise the money required for the brewery, fear of failing if I started the brewery, and maybe not even being able to make any beer that people actually liked. Can you guys relate with this? I'm sure many of you have been here and had some of these exact same thoughts as I did if you've seriously considered this business at all. So as a result of all these thoughts in my head, I just kind of was cruising along through life. I was going to work as a TSA agent, patting people down before they got on an airplane in Fargo, North Dakota, and hanging out with my family. And I didn't recognize it at the moment, but I was in a bit of a life funk at the time. I was just on cruise control, going to work every day without any real goal or direction at the time. And that's when a major wake-up call happened in my life. My father passed away from cancer a little over 2 years ago, and this event really just kind of forced me to take stock and reflect on all aspects of my life including my family and including my job. And I also came to realize, like so many others that have lost a family member, how quickly things can get taken away and limited amount of time we've all got here on this planet to do what we want. So at this point, I decided, it's time to do this, start a brewery or give up. I didn't want to look back at the end of my life and think I could have been there working, in my own business. I was working for the TSA at the time. I really hated going to work, and I would think about starting my own brewery on my daily commute to work just about every day. Finally, there just reached a breaking point, and it became just way too emotionally draining for me to think that I could be operating a brewery full time. And again, I just had to make the decision to either do it or just completely close off the idea and stop thinking about it. Bottom line, I either had to do it or close the door on this chapter in my life. So I had the discussion with my wife, basically laid it all out on the table, how I felt. And fortunately, she was supportive of the idea. I should also mention that we have 4 beautiful kids together, which as any parent watching this is going to know, it just complicates things when you're going to make a big life decision like this, especially in starting a business. Still, we decided it was going to be a team effort to get this business going and become successful. And I was blown away by her support and so thankful that we're in it together as a team. As an aside, if there's one thing I strongly recommend to anyone on this call today, it would be to get the support of your significant other for getting into the brewing business or any other business for that matter. Starting your own business is going to add a whole new dynamic to your relationship, and you're going to need to be on the same team to make this work. Without my wife's blessing, I wouldn't have started this business, nor would I have wanted to, for that matter. So, after all that, you might be wondering, why am I sharing all this stuff with you? And I share my story for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think a lot of times customers especially think I've got some sort of unique brewing powers since I own a brewery. But that's really not the case at all. I'm super passionate about brewing. I've spent years practicing at home. I've surrounded myself with other brewers. And most importantly, I never stopped learning. Eventually, I was able to make beer that I was proud of and start a business around my hobby. I don't think that anyone should feel like they can't start a brewery because their beer might not be good enough, in air quotes. Brewing is something that anyone can do if you just practice a lot, and this shouldn't be a concern of yours either. I own a brewery, and I believe you can make quality beer if you just commit yourself to it and learn from others and just focus on making your beer consistently good. Second, if you're always worried about your business failing, how much it's going to cost to get started, whether or not people are going to like your beer, starting a brewery might not be for you. These worries, like I described before, they prevented me from starting my brewery for years until my dad's passing, when I realized you've got to take advantage of the time you have here. To start a brewery, you're going to need to focus your mental efforts on growing the business, not on the what ifs and head trash that's going to paralyze you for years. Now, don't get me wrong at all. You want to be very prepared before getting into this business. My point simply is, don't spend all your time worrying for worry's sake. It's not productive and you're going to drive yourself nuts. Trust me. So, all that being said, let's get on to today's class. In this webinar, I am going to share 4 things that you need to do to start a craft brewery based on my own experiences, and do it in a way that doesn't leave you taking a huge financial risk. So let's do this thing. Let me just grab a quick drink of water here, and we'll get going on to the next slide. Okay, so the first step you'll need to do to start a brewery is one that you could probably guess. You need to figure out what type of beer you're actually going to be serving. And my humble opinion, you'll want to start out by serving at least 4 to 5 beers, but I would not recommend going over 8 styles of beer when you're just starting out. This is going to complicate things a lot in the early days, and you will need to invest more into supplies. And really, you want to showcase your best beers early on, the stuff that you've had the time to perfect. And just an FYI, this is actually a shot of one of my beers in the outside of our brewery, We are in an industrial complex type area, showing you some more of these photos of my brewery as we get into this too. So here is a list of the beers currently on tap at drumconrath Brewing Company. As you can see, we've got 8 on tap currently. Some of these, like the Royal County Cream Ale, are limited editions, and I like to have 1 or 2 seasonal beers on tap at a time to keep things fresh. My regular customers seem to appreciate the limited edition beers too, and it gives me the opportunity to experiment making new flavors all the time, which is one of the reasons I got into craft brewing in the first place. This is also a great time for me to bring up the meaning of my name, Drumconrath Brewing Company. My ancestors hailed from a little town in Ireland called Drumconrath. I've never actually been there myself, but I always try to keep this Irish style in mind with my beers. Furthermore, you'll always find a lot of Irish flags, photographs, music playing in the background of my tap room that are all Irish to add to this vibe. Due to my rich beer heritage, I guess, selecting my beer niche was pretty easy in my brand. As a step to starting your own brewery, again, I would recommend writing down your 4 to 5 styles of beer that you plan to serve. And one tip I have based on my own experience is to make sure and carry at least 2 really popular styles of beer in your lineup. As you already know, my brewery is located in North Dakota, and North Dakota is light beer country. So Bud Light and Coors Light is what most people enjoy drinking out here. Most people have never even heard of an Imperial Milk Stout, much less ever want to try one. So at first, I had this idea to not serve any light beers in my area to really just differentiate myself. And that was a mistake early on. So my regulars are going to come in for my Ribbon Man Red, for example, located at the top of my menu there. But bring in friends with them that aren't accustomed to drinking anything but the standard American beers. What I discovered is that some people would think my beer was bad just because it was a style that they had never had before or weren't accustomed to. And taste preference, as you know, is very subjective. And it's not that the beer was bad. The taste just wasn't what they expected in a beer. And as a result, I decided to add a light beer to the mix. And now I carry this at all times. This move has helped my business quite a bit and actually makes up between 10 to 15% of my total sales on a monthly basis now. So it's been helpful to have that on tap. Now, depending on where you live, you certainly don't need to have a light beer on tap specifically. I do in my area of North Dakota, but if I lived on the West Coast, for example, a pale ale or an IPA on tap, I think would suffice. Just keep in mind that while many of your customers, they're going to want a unique porter or a bitter that they can only get from you, some folks just want to come in and have a regular old beer while they're out. And I know this might sound crazy as a home brewer, but you need to have some of these options available as it's really going to help out the bottom line of your business significantly. So make sure to build this into your business plan and your menu when you're just starting out. So after you've got your beer selected, it's the perfect time to get those recipes together. Some of you watching this may already have some recipes finalized at this time. And that's great, so I won't be spending a lot of time on recipe development here. One recommendation I do have is to take advantage of your time as a home brewer to perfect your recipes as much as possible before you actually start the business. Also, write down your recipes and get super specific about the ingredients you need for each batch. Having very detailed recipes is going to be extremely important so that you can provide consistency for your beers. And additionally, if you ever plan on having someone else brew a batch for you, they're going to need all the details to make it right. And another thing you're going to discover is that as you scale up your recipes from, say, 10-gallon batches to 100-gallon batches, maybe even higher than that, you're going to need to be more specific on how much yeast or other ingredients are added. And I use a program called Beersmith that helps you measure out the percentages of beer that I still use to this day, and I used it as a home brewer too. You can pick up this program for about $20, and I highly recommend using it. to anyone just getting started. There are some other software available that you can use that's a little bit more expensive, but I think this is fine for my purposes and it's easy to use. So to summarize, here are the action steps on the screen here that you need to take away in this section. Pick the beers that you want to make, create recipes, test and refine those recipes so that they are as consistent as possible. This is going to be the fun part. If you're someone like me, like I mentioned previously, you can always switch up your varieties in the future, add limited batches, and just continue to have fun brewing. Brewing is not rocket science. If you brew beer that you love, other people are probably going to like it too. So let's move on. After selecting your beers, the next steps, I recommend to everyone that they start writing a business plan at this point in the process. I'm not a guy that went to business school, so this is not my forte originally, but my own business mentor that I started out with. He already had a successful brewery in Minnesota and really helped me see the light on this one. He taught me that the business plan is a living document that gives you a place to write down all the ideas about your business. It's a document that's going to change and be revised over time, but it's something that can help you get a really clear picture on some pretty important aspects of your business. So things like how you plan to make money in your business, how you plan to operate your business, and how much you expect to spend for startup costs. Pretty important questions, right? Additionally, if you plan to get a business loan or work with investors, you're going to need a well thought out business plan anyways. This is a document that helps these types of people decide if your brewery is going to make sense from a business perspective. Again, I'll be sharing my experiences with banks and investors in the next section, but I've got to thank my friend and mentor for encouraging me to organize this document early on. Without it, I wouldn't have gone about I would have just gone about this process really haphazardly and not had an understanding of how much it was going to cost to start up my business or really how much revenue I expected to make in the early days. I would have been operating on hope and guesstimates, which is not a great way to start a business. And I've seen some other breweries get into it this way and fail, and is because they didn't think about this step early on. So don't make this mistake. It's so easy to start out and make. Even if you don't plan on getting a bank loan or work with investors, I would still spend time on this too. It's well worth your time investment. And bottom line, it doesn't cost you anything to put in this time on your end either. So just go ahead and do it. Now, my mentor, who owns a Minnesota brewery, was able to help me out a lot during this process in determining what information to enter into my business plan. Having someone with a really unique expertise like this to just ask questions was invaluable and helped me out a lot when I began approaching investors and banks for startup capital. When asked how I determined some of these cost numbers and revenue expectations, I was just able to cite numbers provided from my mentor that actually operated a brewery, and this carried a lot more weight than what I would have been able to put together by researching figures and facts online. It also, I think, determined or demonstrated that I was serious about making this work with investors by showing them that I was willing to reach out and get perspective from other people that knew more about operating this type of business than I did. Now, obviously, we don't have time to go through writing a full business plan in today's session. And keep in mind that it could realistically take you a couple of months to put together an accurate business plan. If you're looking to start out for a starting point, you can easily find some business plan templates by searching, business plan templates for free into Google. And this is going to give you a starting point for putting this all together, and it's not going to cost you any money. Again, don't do this part alone. You want someone that you can call on to make sure that your assumptions about operating a business are accurate. Ideally, you want somebody that actually owns a brewery, but you can also find somebody that has a strong business background, like a former CEO of a company. I can't tell you how many times I contacted my mentor in the process to share my estimates for getting started, and it gave me a much better idea what to expect financially and made the process a lot easier for me to get started. It's just a lot of little details about running a craft brewery and opening this type of business, it's important to have a guide. Now, one way specifically to find a mentor would be to get in touch with your local Brewers Guild. And there's a link on this page to find some of the guilds in your area and just see what resources they can offer you. You might be surprised at how these more experienced folks in these organizations are willing to lend a helping hand for you. Another resource is your local Chamber of Commerce. They might also have some free resources available to help you put together and help you work the formatting of your business plan, offer some general advice on how to raise funds. Their help is generally free, although they're not really going to know anything about the craft brewing business. Just keep that in mind. But they will know how to format a business plan, so there is some value there. We could spend, again, an entire semester on this topic putting together a business plan, so it's impossible to cover all the details. With that being said, let's discuss some data that's going to be critical in your business plan in the next section. And you can actually use some of the numbers that I'm going to post up here on these next slides as a guide to estimating your startup costs and just give you a sense on what your revenue numbers might look like too. My guess is that one of the biggest questions you had before joining this class or getting on this webinar is how to raise money. I know that was one of the biggest questions that I saw in the pre-question survey that before we started the class. Before we get into this, just take comfort in knowing this was one of my biggest questions as well before actually starting my own brewery. So, raising money, obviously, one of the biggest challenges you'll face when getting started. I didn't have a rich uncle when I was starting out, and I'm going to go ahead and presume that you are in a similar situation as me, so you're going to need to find a different way to acquire money than asking a rich relative. There are two common ways to acquire money to open a brewery. One, you can get a bank loan, and two, you can find investors. There are also some less common ways to acquire capital that will work for some people if you happen to be in the right place. For example, my mentor actually got a government grant to open his brewery. It didn't cover all of the funding for it, but that was a way that helped him. There's also some creative ways to secure funds now, like using GoFundMe or Kickstarter campaigns that can work for some people. And finally, you could go in, partner up with somebody, and then split the expenses 50-50 too, which is another way to go about it. And there's, some other handful of ways to secure capital. But let's face it, most folks are going to be using one of the methods I used above. And at this point, you might be wondering how I got the money I needed to start my business. Well, I am glad you asked that question. So first off, I actually started a Kickstarter campaign early on. You can check out the screenshot below. But as you can see, I was not able to raise all the money there and didn't even get $5,000. I quickly realized I needed to look for some ways outside crowdfunding to get this done. Looking back, I think crowdfunding could work really well for some people. If, for example, you have a really big social media following or you've got a ton of existing connections from like running a previous business, this could be a good source of funding to worth trying out. But long story short, I just wasn't in the position to raise the kind of money really needed to start this type of business here. So bottom line, I needed to start looking for other options. Next step, I took my business plan to about 4 or 5 different banks around town. As mentioned, I was still working as a TSA employee at the time, and I'm not sure if you heard, but they don't make much money. As a result, I didn't have much cash on hand to really get a loan through a traditional bank. To get a business loan through a bank, you need to have a lot of cash on hand to pay off the loan or some type of collateral that the bank can claim if you default on your loan. I could technically get a loan, but the interest rates were pretty crazy. I think I got a quote for a loan at 15% interest. This was out of the question for me. Fortunately, or so I thought, near this same time period, I was introduced to some people that were interested in investing in a brewery. Now, a good tip for finding investors is to get in touch with people in your local Brewers Guild. These individuals might know people that have invested in breweries in the past and can sometimes make introductions to people. This is actually how I met a pair of prospective investors that were interested in starting a brewery in Fargo area, but wanted to be more passive and not really operate the business themselves full time. Again, I walked them through the business plan that I had, but they had some different ideas on basically how the business would operate. They wanted to add a restaurant to the brewery, which I frankly didn't have any interest in pursuing. Now, the downside to working with investors, as I discovered, is that they've really got to have the same vision as you do about operating the business. They've got to have the same goals, and you need to follow their rules when starting out. There is a lot of breweries that are super successful now that started out with investors, and it's worked extremely well for some people. And every situation is different, and it really depends what you want to do. Ultimately, I discovered this process. I discovered through this process that I wanted to keep things simple and either succeed or fail on my own. But for better or worse, I would start my own brewery on my own terms, serve the beer I wanted to brew, and it would either succeed or fail. Again, not the right choice for everybody, but this was the right one for me. So at this point, I had tried crowdfunding, I tried getting a bank loan, and I spoke with investors and decided that wasn't the right fit either. So at this point, it would have been pretty easy for me to throw in the towel and say, this is impossible. But I'm a firm believer that if you want something, you've just got to be willing to make the sacrifice to go out and get it. You got to find a way to make it happen. So just like when we started down this journey, my wife and I, we sat down together around the kitchen table and discussed what our options are. Around the kitchen table that night, we decided we were going to take out a second mortgage on our house to get the startup capital we needed to start the business. We needed about $50,000 in startup funds, and that's exactly what we took out on our house. We ran the numbers, and the interest rates were really, really low since we could use the house as collateral, and the monthly payment was low enough so that, we kind of figured if the business completely tanked, I could go back to work, cover the payments, and I'm not going to lie and say this was an easy decision by any means, but ultimately we signed our names on the dotted line and got the money we needed to start our business. And just like that, boom, we were in business. Now, I want to do more than just share my story, but I also want to discuss what the money was used to buy. And equipment is not as expensive as you might think. All metal equipment, actually, I sourced from China and did my own importing. The fermenters I use are plastic, which is a lot less glamorous and a little harder to work with than if you use stainless steel. But if the plastic ones, for example, if they get too hot, it's going to wreck the beer. I built a cold room myself, filtering tanks. Bottom line, I would have loved to buy everything from state-of-the-art fermentation tanks, all handmade in Germany, but that just wasn't an option for me based on my budget. And I'm looking back, I'm glad that I didn't do this either. Not once has somebody complained about my tanks not being from the right region of Germany or whatever. Some of the things I did to get started might seem laughable, and frankly it is, but at the end of the day, it helped me save some money and allowed me to get started. And now I operate a brewery, so that's pretty awesome. My thinking is that you can always go back and upgrade the equipment later. All that being said, here is a start of my equipment list that you'll need to get started. Feel free to include some of this as a reference point for your startup costs within your business plan too. Just like anything else, you can pay a lot of money for these pieces if you want to, or you can find cheaper alternatives. By being lean with the equipment costs when you start out is nice because it's going to allow you to get started without risking as much on your financial future. You keep your startup costs lower. It also means that you're going to have a lower monthly payment, so your business is going to get profitable faster. And again, no need to write down everything on these slides because I'm going to be sending out these to you after class so that you have them available. So here's a little bit of a summary of my main startup costs. So brew house and filtering or bright tanks, those were about $11,000. The brew house is where you make the beer, and the filtering tanks, you pump it into the fermentation vessel. Plastic filtering tanks might not look as pretty as stainless steel. I think I showed you a picture of those in some of the earlier slides, but they do work. And again, not a single customer has complained about those. Fermentation tanks, those were about $500 a piece. I had 2 of those. Kegs, believe it or not, these are actually going to be pretty expensive. You could get these a lot of times for about $60 a piece used, and you are going to need a lot of them. I have about $12,000 total in full-size kegs. I didn't technically need as many of these as I have when I just got it started, but I have goals within the next 12 months to start distributing some of my kegs to local bars, local restaurants, and start getting my brand out in the region locally, which hasn't happened yet, but I really got a good deal on them front. So I wanted to buy a lot of them up front and just prepare for the future that way. So I didn't have to spend more later on those. Sinks, you're going to need a 3-compartment sink with a separate hand washing sink. I really went low budget on that. I think I spent $350 total on the 2 of those there. You're going to need a lot of draft parts, draft faucets, lines that go to the kegs, regulators, bulk, CO2, nitrogen tanks. Those probably cost me about $2,000. Pumps, those cost me about another $1,000. Shelving units, I, use those to stack my grain, and it just kind of makes things look better around the shop. Again, I didn't buy the most expensive ones possible, but those probably sent me back about $1,000. And also a keg cooler, in a cold room. I bought mine on clearance at Menards, which is basically your Lowe's or Home Depot, depending on where you live. It's kind of the same store. I got a chest freezer that I converted from there that I got on clearance for $300. One just basic tip, have backups and spare parts on hand. And, especially when you're getting started out, depending on the facility that you're going to be working on, you might need to do some electrical, you might need to do some plumbing work. So that's going to depend a lot based on where you end up renting or where you live. But that's going to be a flexible, big time variable cost when you get started. Moving on to some of the other big costs, I would recommend having a tap room to do sales and to actually start selling your beer early on. I think it's a great thing to have. You meet a lot of cool people. Again, went super cheap, as cheap as possible on furniture for my tap room. Tables, chairs, flags, art, bar stools, all that stuff is going to end up costing a bit of money. I actually went to Walmart to get my bar stools. I think I got them for like $20 a piece. Total, I spent about $10,000 on all this equipment. And then, of course, you're going to need all your basic beer making ingredients, your yeast, your grain, your hops, etc. When starting out, you're going to need to restock those early on. That cost me about $2,000 getting started. And then, the facility that you decide to rent out, I will talk about that a little bit in a later section, but I have a really low rent price, which is awesome, about $1,100 monthly for rent. Now, mine, again, is 2,160 square feet total for this. You could probably get by with about 1,500 square feet at a minimum. And have an area to brew and a tap room. You would be tight. It would be tight in there. But I would definitely not go below that ever. And, obviously the more space you have, the better, because then you have room to grow into it. And, add it all up, I started my business for, just over $50,000. I know the numbers don't match up exactly here from what I just shown you, and there's a lot of kind of knick-knacky stuff that you end up buying that just adds up. Napkins, hand soap, cleaning supplies, brewing supplies, light bulbs for the place, just all kinds of stuff that you end up purchasing when you start a brewery. And, overall, you should be up and running within about 6 months, maybe less, 4 months if everything works out. It took me about 9 months total to actually open the doors to my business. Now, understanding your startup costs, like I've described already, this is going to go a really long ways to understanding how big of a loan you need. And you're going to want to be as detailed as possible with this part and include this information in your business plan. Again, my biggest monthly expense, $1,100. And at this time, haven't even been in business for a year yet. And due to my low monthly expenses and my low monthly loan payment, it actually has made it pretty easy for me to turn a profit at the end of the month, even early on, which is just really reduced the stress of operating the business. And, now I have cash coming in that I can basically do whatever I want with. And we'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing with that later on in the presentation here. Now, after you figure out your startup costs and your monthly operating costs, you can start to make some of the estimates on how much revenue you plan to generate. Now, your run rate's going to vary, but here's the basic cost and revenue numbers for my beers that you could use as a starting point to determine how many beers you'll need to sell to come out ahead at the end of the month. Now, what's the profit margin on a beer? Here's what my figures look like. So my cost to make a batch of beer is about $300. Now, this $300 is, for my Ribbon Man Red. And again, you guys, it might cost you $290. It could cost you $320 to make a batch of beer, but this is just kind of a good rounded out number. Now, for me, a batch of beer equals out 17 5-gallon kegs. So I get 17 5-gallon kegs per batch of beer. Now, within each one of those kegs, I get about 40 beers that I can sell. Now, anybody that's worked with a keg before, I think you'll know that sometimes you're going to get a couple more beers out of that, and sometimes you're going to get a couple less beers out of that. But overall, that's kind of what it works out to. And when I'm saying a beer, I'm going to say that you're going to be selling a 16-ounce glass of beer every single time with that. So again, sometimes you get a little more, sometimes you get a little less. But with those numbers, I sell my beers for $5 a piece. So you're going to end up with 40 beers. That ends up being $3,400 in sales, I think, if I get the numbers right. So yeah, you get 17 5-gallon kegs. You get 40 beers per keg. You sell your beers at $5 a piece for a 16-ouncer. That ends up with $3,400 sales total. So as you can see here, beer is a pretty high revenue product. So that's pretty nice. The other thing I want to point out too is that some beers cost less to make than others. So if you are making light beer, for example, my light beer only costs me about $175, but I still charge the exact same amount for light beers. So I'm still getting $3,400 in total sales, and I spent, $175 in product there. So pretty nice revenue there. One thing I should point out is that I currently brew my own beer, so I don't have any labor costs there, right? So that would cost a little bit more for me to make there. Now, what is an average week in sales for me? So again, I've been open for less than a year now, but I would say at this point, and again, it didn't start out this way week one, but right now I would say a pretty average week is about $1,500 in sales. Again, that's not very much at all. And I expect this number is going to grow a lot in the future. But each month I've continued to increase my revenue. People are continuing to find out about my brewery word of mouth and social media over time. And another thing I want to point out with these numbers is that I'm actually closed on Sundays and Mondays to spend time with my family. So if all I did, say in the next year, was add on those 2 days a week, I could easily, very, very easily bring in another $2,000 in monthly revenue without any extra effort. It's basically just be me being open a couple extra days, and I might actually be doing that later in the year, at least hiring someone else to operate the tap room on that day. So that's kind of how it works out in a nutshell. Again, since I'm only paying $1,100 a month in monthly rent, and it only costs me about $300 to make a batch of beer, and about after an average week, I'm pretty much in the black at this point, and I'm not selling them that much beer. So what I really want to impress on you at this point is think about the month. The monthly rent is going to be huge. And there's some other expenses in there too. There's going to be electricity, there's going to be water payments, just things like that are recurring that you're going to have to pay for. If you want to have cable television in your store, if you want to have a radio in your store, all that stuff is going to add up a bit. But if you can just keep your labor expenses low, and you can keep your, your startup expenses low so that your monthly payment is low, and you keep your labor costs low, you don't need to sell a lot to be in the black. So with that, let's move on to the final section, licensing and location. So outside of raising money and getting a brewery location, getting the appropriate licenses is going to be one of the big hurdles that you have in the beginning. And one big tip I have for you during this process is to pack your patience. It can easily take 4 to 6 months to complete all the licensing requirements and be ready to fill out a seemingly endless amount of documents and getting them certified and sent off in the mail. Remember when I mentioned that things will sometimes take longer than you think? Well, it took me about 9 months to actually get approved to sell beer from start to finish when I actually submitted my license. And one of the challenges of giving advice on getting all the appropriate licensing to start a brewery is that the requirements differ from state to state and city to city. So some states are going to require more paperwork to complete than others, and certain counties are technically dry and won't allow you to operate this type of business. Of course, I've heard there are some loopholes to these restrictions, depending on where you are. So bottom line, you're going to need to do your own homework on the city that makes the most sense for you to open based on the friendliness of operating this type of business, the location, and the cost of rent. Those are all things you're really going to have to think about. And you're going to need, at a high level, from a licensing standpoint, you're going to need approval by 3 entities to start a brewery. So you're going to need federal approval, since this is a federally regulated business serving alcohol. You're going to need state approval, and you're going to need city approval. Now, from my experience, working with the state of North Dakota was pretty easy. I completed a couple forms, paid some fees, and got approval. The states, from what I understand, are usually easy to work with and happily get you up and running quickly so that you can start generating tax dollars for them. Just a side note, that is a photo of the inside of my brewery. There you can see those nice Walmart benches or stools, I guess, that I've got set up there. And there I am behind the tap with a couple of my regulars there. And you can see the nice Irish flags in the background too. So I mentioned this before, but I operate in a small town of Mapleton, North Dakota. And just to put things in perspective, the entire community has under 1,000 people in it. And it's a bedroom community located just outside of Fargo, North Dakota, where the main population base works. And the process of getting approval here within my city was not too challenging either, although there were some minor hoops to get started due to, just small town politics. There's an existing restaurant and bar in town that had concerns about a brewery opening up and creating competition. I don't really consider myself a competitor to a bar like that, and we attract a different type of clientele. So some education needed to be done around that topic, just locally. And also there were some restrictions just on the types of signage I could place outside of my brewery. But all that being said, it was pretty minor stuff. Overall, if you reach out to your city and you ask them what you need to do to get started, the process should be pretty easy, or you'll quickly learn that your city is going to make it too hard to start this type of business, and you can just move to the next potential location, maybe literally in the next town over a couple miles. Now, beyond the city and state licenses, you'll need to get federal approval to start your brewery that is more consistent, right? So everybody that starts a brewery has to go through this process. You can learn more about the federal requirements at a website, ttb.gov/beer/qualified.shtml. I'm going to go ahead and send you that link, so don't worry about having to remember that. But some of the unique requirements about getting federally licensed is that you need a sketch of your brewery's future layout. The land of the brewery will be located on. You need a sketch of that, and you need a sketch of the building. And this means you do need to know the location you will be brewing in before you're given approval by the federal government. So you can't get approval and then find a location. You need to start looking around for a location beforehand. I think there are about 20 forms that you need to complete for the federal section. Since there are just so many details to the legal requirements, I'm going to send a list of resources to help give you more direction on getting started and a follow-up email after this class. Just know that while this process might be confusing and challenging, you're going to get through it. Just take it one step, one form at a time. You'll get there. Everybody does it. You'll be fine. Now, with that being said, let me ask you a question. How many of you are feeling maybe a little bit overwhelmed because we've covered so much information and are feeling kind of like this girl here with water hose of information spraying at her? Now, it's possible to go through all the little steps and things. It's frankly, I should say, now it's pretty much impossible to go through all the little steps and things to consider during a 60 to 90 minute class about starting a brewery like this. I've tried to answer the biggest questions I had when getting started and also share my personal story accomplishing each step in the process to show you, you can do this if you want to do it, no matter what your background is, your current situation. This really is a business that you can do, and I truly believe that because I did it. Now, there are some additional questions that were emailed into me before the class, and I just want to thank everybody again for everybody that sent those in. I'm going to be answering those in the remainder in a lightning round, if you will say, at the end of this class. But first, would it be okay if I were to spend 10 minutes going over a very special offer I created to help you start your own craft brewery? So in the next few weeks, I'm going to be kicking off a 6-week beta class that will be limited to 25 students to guide them step by step through the full process of starting their own craft brewery. This class is designed to help anyone that's serious about starting their own craft brewery turn their dream into a real business. And the goal for each student at the end of class is going to be to walk away with a fully fleshed out and accurate business plan for their craft brewery that you can take and present to either banks or investors. And at the conclusion, each student will also be confident in knowing the steps they need to start and operate a profitable craft brewery long term. What the costs were going to be, what location to look for, and how much revenue they can expect to generate. Now, this class is going to be held live online and start on the date and time listed below this video. And the reason I wanted to do a live class is so that you have the opportunity to ask questions that are specific to your business and get answers immediately. Now, the goal of this is to not only set you on a clear path to starting a brewery, but so that I can serve as your mentor and be a resource to you during these critical early stages of your business. I think this is going to help a lot of people start their business, realize their dreams, and accomplish this for much less risk than they would have taken otherwise. Now, here's an outline of what we'll be covering each week of the 6-week class. Each one of these classes will run for about an hour on average, but some weeks we will go a little bit over that hour mark. The classes are going to be held on Tuesday evenings at the same time each week. So if you can't make it to every class, that's not a problem. And I totally understand. We're going to be recording each one of these classes too, so that you can go back and watch them later. You can also rewatch the classes too if you wanted to go back and relearn some of the points. You can also submit your questions by email directly to me so that I can answer them during the class if you're not able to make it there at a certain time. Now, in week 1, we're going to be covering what I call the pre-planning for your brewery. We'll be off to a super fast start and determining what brewing system you want. We're going to determine your available budget range for buying different equipment. And we're going to figure out the list of beers you'll serve and walk you through the components of a business plan for a craft brewery. In week 2, we're going to cover how to get the money to start your brewery in much greater detail. This is an important topic, so we're going to be learning a lot of details about this, how to find and work with investors, how to get a bank loan. We'll also cover projecting sales and revenue for your business so that you know what volume of sales you'll need to cover any loans that you have to take on during the process of this business. In week 3, we're going to dive into the right location for your brewery. Now, location can make or break your business, and it's often your biggest monthly cost. So you want to learn how to find a good location. We'll also cover how large of a space you'll need, how to negotiate leases so that you can save money each month. That's what I did with mine. That's how I get an $1,100 per month rent. We also dive deeper into licensing, and I walk you through the federal component specifically in much greater detail. Then, by week 4, you'll be ready for brewing equipment and build out of your brewery. We'll work together to draft your full list of equipment needs and plan for your first orders. We'll also build the layout of your brewer house and tap room during this week. Week 5 will be a fun one where we plan your first batches to brew. This week is what I'm really passionate about and will help you make the jump from home brewer to pro brewer. And I'll also share my exact process for creating your own recipes. So that's going to be a super, super fun week. By week 6, we're going to be approaching the point of being ready to actually get up and running with your business. And we're going to cover the topic of marketing for your business. Now, preparing for your grand opening, marketing online and offline are all going to be covered this week so you can get customers and get profitable as fast as possible. So again, I want to go back and make sure you realize, who this class is right for. This class really is for those of you that have been brewing beer at home like me for years. That was my exact situation. You've always wanted to go pro, you've wanted to go out on your own, but you just, didn't think it was possible for whatever reason, or just nothing happened to really kind of kick you into gear and have you take the next step. Or maybe you just didn't get the right encouragement along the way. It's also for anyone that is serious about starting their own craft brewery, but you want to speed up the process of getting started. You want to avoid some of the mistakes, and you want to get everything accomplished at a much lower startup cost than you would have, doing it on your own otherwise. And just a sidebar, those are a couple of t-shirts that you can pick up at my brewery if you happen to stop by Mapleton at some point. Now, at this point, you might be thinking that, you still can't get started on your brewery for a few different reasons. Maybe you haven't known the steps in the past. Well, by the end of the 6 weeks, I assure you, you are going to know exactly what to do. You're going to have the tools you need and the mentorship to make this next step. Second, in week 2, we're going to outline your different options and also dive into the process of finding and working with investors so that you can get the money you need to start your business. I also want to make sure that you don't overpay for equipment or rent. This is a really big one with me. You got to keep your costs low when you're starting out. So, and additionally, you don't want to expose yourself to a lot of financial risk. That's going to put a huge strain on, your family, your relationships, and just your personal health. I want to stress, you don't need $1 million. You don't need $500,000 to get started with a brewery. As I mentioned earlier, I opened the doors to Drumconrath Brewing Company for well below $100,000. In fact, it was about half that. Finally, you've got legitimate fears of failing and losing money when you start a business. And this is the exact thing that helped me back for years when I got started. Looking back, if I had gotten a mentor sooner and a teacher that I could turn to that would have been able to explain to me just what I needed to do and kind of the calculated risks that were actually there, I would have been way less afraid to get started. Again, my goal for this masterclass is to help you understand what the risks are, how to mitigate those risks of losing money. And again, being prepared and skeptical is smart before entering any type of business. But worrying without a clear idea of what you're even worried about is another matter entirely, and it's not productive or healthy for you. So to make sure that you get as much value as possible out of this class, when you invest and enroll in the Craft Brew Masterclass today, you're going to get my complete list of suppliers, equipment, and a list of everything you need and where to get it for your brewery. All of this is organized into a single document, and you can use this tool that will guide you in ensuring you have literally everything you need to start a brewery, from fermenters to 3-compartment sinks, all in one convenient location. Now, when you've got this resource, you're not going to have to spend weeks of time trying to find out, what you need to get from different suppliers and different equipment makers. Also, I'm not a salesperson that's going to get a commission when you buy any specific type of equipment. I'm just giving you the information, and I can show you areas where you can save a lot of money in startup costs. And it's very likely you will save at least a few $1,000s using this document as I share my insights on what to invest heavily in, which I think is kegs, so that you can get distribution, and where you can look for discounts or used equipment. Now, again, kegs, you're going to need a lot of them. Don't buy these new. You can get them used very easily. So you get my list of suppliers and equipment. This is a list of everything you need, where you can get it, how much it's going to cost, organized in one location. I personally value this at $297. And it's going to save you a ton of time in the beginning to have a list of everything you need up front and make sure you don't miss anything. Now, as mentioned earlier, one of the outcomes I want for you at the end of this masterclass is for you to get a completed business plan that you can take and immediately turn around and present to investors or banks at the end of this class. But here's the thing. What if some of your revenue or cost estimates are off? What if you wanted a second opinion on your competitive research? For this reason, we're adding in an additional week of training where I will personally review your business plan and provide specific feedback on ways to improve your future business. Now, having somebody that has actually started a brewery look at your business plan and provide feedback is going to be invaluable, since I'll be able to immediately look at your costs, your revenue expectations, and recognize if something is off. I'm going to be personally reviewing this for you. Now, this is going to be taking a long time to review each one of these business plans and provide, really helpful feedback to one of these too, which is one of the biggest reasons I need to limit this class to just 25 students. I'm just simply not going to have time to review any more business plans than that, and also run my own craft brewery at the same time, right? Still, this is something that I know is extremely important, and this is something that I had done with my business before I got started, and I actually paid someone $1,000 to do this myself, and it was totally worth it. So again, to get your business plan reviewed by someone that has actually started a brewery, this could cost you about $1,000. That's what I spent, and it's going to be totally worth it because it could literally help 10x your business and make sure that you're not overspending on something, and make sure that you've got the right plan in place that's actually going to work. Next, one of the goals that I have for this class is to create a mini mastermind or community around everyone that decides to enroll in this class. That's the right move for them. So starting a brewery, it really requires a special type of person. You've got a special set of interests that most people don't have. That's why I'm also going to be creating a private Facebook group so that the members of this class can connect with each other, ask questions, share progress in a private area of folks that all have the same goals. The goal of this community is to remain active on this community long term so that you can continue to share your progress and get support from one another. I also plan to be sharing updates on my business here as well throughout the rest of the year, especially as I start moving into distributing my beer into local restaurants and bars. I'm going to be sharing everything that I learn about that, how I get, my beers into there. I'm just not at that point yet where I've actually started that, but I'm going to have a ton to share in a lot of lessons that I learned there as well. Now, I know other private Facebook groups and masterminds, a lot of those charge between $50 to $100 a month to get access to their private community. And this is going to be a one-of-a-kind place to just meet other people that are doing the exact same thing as you and getting started. So, I really put a value at this at about $497. And this is something you could get value up from for years to come. Now, one last thing, I'm going to add a bonus week to this course where we can all meet up in an unstructured way online. Now, as I mentioned, this is the first time I've ever taught this information to a formal group, and I want to build in an extra week where we can just meet up online. We can cover other topics students in this class have after we go through the 6-week masterclass, and we're just going to cover anything that we might have missed, or maybe there's some aspect that you want to cover in more detail that we just didn't cover in as much detail. And it's also going to be a great time to just ask more questions that you would like during this time. And, just getting this kind of extra help and access to somebody that has started a brewery is really priceless. And this is going to transform some businesses here. And I just really think this is a priceless opportunity. So bottom line, if you added up the total value of all the master classes and the bonuses, this would end up being $5,796. Now, obviously, I'm not going to charge you $5,796 for this class, but if I did charge this amount and all I did was give you the steps needed to own and grow a successful brewery that would provide a stable income for your family and personal fulfillment for you, wouldn't that be totally worth it? I think so. And if, for example, all the supplier list did was help you save $8,000 when starting your business, and you got no additional value from the classes, from the business plan review, from the private community with other folks that are starting a brewery, wouldn't that be totally worth the $5,796 because you saved $8,000 up front? And if you completed the business plan, if all your completed business plan did was help you find and convince a single investor to believe in your business so that you could get started, wouldn't that be worth the investment you made? Now, I think we can all agree that if only one of the results above from this investment happened, this entire class would be a no-brainer. But again, I want to assure you that that's not what you'll be investing in this masterclass if you decide it's the right path for you. My goal with this really is to help other people get started that were in the same position as me just a couple of years ago. People like me that have thought about doing this for years but didn't have the right help or plan to accomplish their goal. And when I was getting started, frankly, I don't think I would have been able to risk the $5,796 either. Even if I wanted to, I'm not sure if my wife, Mrs. Core, would have allowed that. She definitely would have. So after a lot of consideration, I decided to offer this for $997, which is an incredible value to anyone starting out. Now, this is what I had literally thought until a few days ago, $997, until my wife actually made me realize that when we were starting out, we needed as much money as possible to purchase equipment and really get ourselves in a financial situation where we could launch this business. So kind of went back to the drawing board, thanks to my wife. And after thinking about the goals of this class, I reconsidered that number. And since this is, the first time we're holding this class, my goal really for this is just to get as many success stories as possible out of this class, provide as much value as possible in this class. So with that goal in mind, I've decided that we're going to be actually offering this for an even lower price than this class will ever be offered in the future. So ultimately what I landed on is that This class is going to be offered for a one-time payment of $497. My thinking is that this level of investment is going to ensure that everyone that joins this class is going to be super, super serious about starting their own brewery. I also feel like you guys are going to get an enormous return from a financial and a time savings perspective by enrolling. And if you're serious about starting this type of business and want to start making rapid progress towards your goal now, this is really the perfect time to begin and start that journey. As an aside, I think this class is going to be a lot of fun, frankly, for the 25 people that are ready to take action. It's certainly not every day that you meet a group of 25 people with such similar goals. So I'm really looking forward to the start of this class coming up shortly. So if you are ready to start your own craft brewery, I encourage you to sign up through the link below. After you click on the link, you'll be taken to a page with a form that asks for basic information like your name and payment information. After you complete the form, you'll be automatically directed to our private members area that we use during the class. And you'll find more information about attending the live classes from there, along with other information, including a class syllabus, so that you know more details on what the plan are. You'll also receive a confirmation email letting you know that you're in, and I'll be sending you an email personally too, just to make sure that you have all the information and a little bit of prep work, I guess, before we get started. That way, you're ready for the first class. Again, due to the level of one-on help that is going to be offered through this class, I have to limit this to only 25 students maximum. So definitely enroll as soon as possible if you want to take advantage of this. With that being said, if you do have any other questions about this class prior to enrollment, I've included my email address below this video that you can send me with any questions, and I'm happy to respond. And I'm looking forward to meeting some of you and getting to know a lot of you more personally, once the first class starts up and over the 8-week time period that we're going to be meeting together with all the bonuses. So this may sound a little bit cliche, but I really believe it's true. I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to help start your brewery. This is a way to find a mentor. This is a way to surround yourself with other smart brewers doing the same thing as you. And I'm looking forward to the success stories that come out of this class. It's going to be awesome. And I really hope that you're going to be one of these success stories if starting a brewery is something that you've, thought about for years like I did. With that being said, let's get into the questions that were sent before this class. Again, I want to thank everyone that sent these in. There's some really good ones that I wasn't able to address during the formal presentation, but wanted to get to them here. So let's bring on question number 1 after I take a real quick swig of water here. Question number 1. We're going to do this rapid fire lightning round style. Is the craft brewing market too saturated? I personally think this depends on the market you're in. If you're in Denver, maybe. Now, smaller towns and suburbs just outside downtown areas, I really believe are untapped gems. Now, before Prohibition, if you think about it, literally every town had a brewery. And part of this was because distribution, just simply what it was today. But eating and drinking local really is a mega trend at this time. I think people like to see local things succeed. They like to drink regional beers from in places that are nearby them. I think people that visit other areas like to drink beers that are from that area regionally that they can't get at home. So I would just say if you're to use the Denver example, if Denver's too saturated, take a look at the suburbs just outside Denver and find some areas that don't have a lot of breweries yet. You may also be surprised at how much lower the monthly rent is there versus a downtown location, which, again, is a really big one for me. So here's a great question. How did you decide on your production capacity? So some of this gets a little bit technical, but I think a 3-barrel system is the most versatile size for your money to get started. That's what I use. You can work one really long day and get 2 batches of beer out of it. And you could also make about 4,000 barrels annually with this if you had some hired help. And the input cost with this is going to remain very low, even if you hire an employee to do some of the work. Now, a 10-barrel system would be as high as I would go initially, and you could probably hit the 10,000 barrel mark, which is right kind of the benchmark for breweries that have made it, quote unquote. But I think the 3-barrel system is a great way to start out on a budget, and then 10 barrels being the max, since it's going to take you a little while probably to ramp up to that level. I think anywhere in that production capacity is a good place to start. Depending on, again, a lot of it depends on what budget you have. Next question, how time consuming is it to operate a brewery? So it's time consuming, definitely. If you want to start a business, it's going to take your time. I've got a wife and 4 kids, so I understand the importance of being home and enjoying time with your kids and making sure everything is good on the home front. I actually decided, I think I mentioned this before, to close Sunday and Monday to be able to spend time with my family, even though I know I'm leaving money on the table by making this decision. Now, if time is a major concern, I would say that you could technically do this for just a couple days a week. And I know someone personally that is actually doing this. You're not going to get rich off of it, but I know a brewery in Bismarck, North Dakota that is only open Friday and Saturday. So that's the 2 most profitable days of the week. They do, again, leave money on the table because they're not open every day, but this is actually the type of business you could start part-time with a job. You could run it on the weekends for a while if you wanted. And assuming your monthly rent and your cost was low enough, start making a profit off of it while you kept your job. That's definitely a problem, and that's what those guys in Bismarck are doing. And they're doing pretty well on it. Next question, should you hire a brewmaster? This is an interesting one for me. I wouldn't hire a brewmaster, but that's because I wouldn't do, I'm able to do everything myself. A brewmaster is someone that has been to school for brewing. They have a professional brewing experience and have worked in a brewery. You don't need a brewmaster technically to start, and there are lots of places that do not have these. You just have a head brewer instead, or some other title. I got into this business again because I love brewing, and this is what I love to do. I don't want to let somebody else do the fun part. If you do want to operate this business more passively, though, or say you don't really want to necessarily learn how to brew yourself, hiring a brewmaster is a good idea then. Just keep in mind that, you're going to need decent salary to pay a brewmaster, and this is going to hit your bottom line in those critical first few months, maybe even years of the business. So just keep that in mind. So here's a great question too. What's it like running your brewery? Love this question. So here's kind of the gist of it. So I've got 1 or 2, what I would say, brew days a week that I pretty much dedicate to brewing. I'll come in, open up my brew software, turn the water on, start filling the tank, weigh up my grain. Then I'll know if I need to add, any salt to the water or pH adjustments. I start dumping in grain, mixing it up. And then I do inventory. I'll figure out what I need, order materials. I'll clean the tap room, kind of do that sort of thing. I've also, some days I'll clean the tanks. Other days I'll, fermenters need cleaning too. So just kind of a lot of, maintenance stuff like that. So brewing, cleaning, restocking, ordering more stuff. Now, later in the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, those I really count as my taproom days. I come in, I basically count up the till, clean everything real quick. This stuff, this whole process maybe takes 15 minutes. I clean the bathrooms, pull the pins on the taps, open up the overhead door when it's time to open, put out my flags, and, I'm open for business. And a lot of times there are 2 or 3, 4 people waiting outside, and, I welcome them in and I start pouring beer and I start talking to my customers. So that's pretty much it. And then also too, I guess I should just say kind of in between those times during the slow periods or before I'll open too, again, I'm going to be getting into actually getting distribution for my beer locally. So getting into restaurants and things. So I've started to make some calls to different places to figure out how I can get my kegs in there too. So, just a little bit of low effort calls, business work, maintenance, that type of thing. So what is the best part of owning a brewery? This answer actually that I'm going to give you surprises me a lot, but I'd say it's the people that I've met along the way. I've become friends with a ton of people that I never would have met if I didn't start this business. And I didn't expect to become friends with so many of my customers and regulars when I just started starting out. Also, being able to brew as a job, continue to just test out different beers, that's awesome. I mean, it's just a privilege to be able to do this and support yourself. So next question, how long did it take for you to get profitable? Real good question, especially when you're starting out. So again, it didn't take me too long to get in the black. So operating profitably on a monthly basis. But, that's going to depend on how big you want to do it, right? So I have a positive cash flow already, which is great because I'm going to be testing out some different marketing ideas with the extra cash in the upcoming months. I actually am starting testing radio ads later this month, which I'm not entirely convinced on, but I'm gonna test it out for a few months and see what happens. And my profit, and most importantly, my low monthly expenses is what's allowing me to kind of invest into marketing. As far as how long, I would say by month 3, about midway through month 3, I was already operating at a profit. And I also just keep this in mind. I do everything myself right now, which means I'm extremely lean. I don't have to pay anyone else a salary. And like I said, if you hire on a brewmaster right away and some other staff, that's going to create more overhead. And you're just going to need to sell more beer to get ahead. But like I said, I mean, basically after week 1, everything after week 1 at this point, I'm making a profit off of. Again, I realize I'm going to have to bring on some employees here later this year, probably to operate, especially on Sunday. But I mean, I'm going to make money off of that endeavor. But that's kind of what it looks like to me. So next question, how can you be confident your beer is good enough? This is another big question that came up from a lot of people that entered in their questions into the survey. And thank you. There were a lot of people that were kind of asking different variations of this question. And again, like I've alluded to in my own personal story, don't let the fact that you might not make a good beer hold you back. Anyone can make good beer with practice. Just look at how much Coors Light's sold each year. I mean, I'm joking about that, but at the same time, I'm serious. Good beer is subjective. It's going to depend from person to person. Keep brewing beer, share it with your friends and family, get feedback. And bottom line, if you like the taste, other people are going to like the taste too. Question came through, why are you doing this class? This is another good question. So one reason I decided to do this class is just because I have people all the time asking me, how I started a business. I've had people call me, just asking for help on how to start their brewery. And just because I had a mentor that was great and helped me out, I feel obligated to help out other people too. So there's just tons of people that want to operate this type of business. I thought it would be really cool to just create a place and a time where I could come and just share all the information that I had and meet other people that brew and just create a really fun classroom atmosphere. And there is a second reason to this too. I've seen other classes come up lately and get started on how to start a brewery that were put on by equipment dealers or like manufacturers. And these how to start a brewery classes seem to always be taught by salesmen or like account reps for these companies, not actually somebody that has started a craft brewery themselves. So, it's not that you can't learn stuff from these people, but it's kind of like going to dental school and learning from somebody that's never been a dentist, right? So that they might be really smart. They probably read a ton of books, but they've never actually done it. And on top of that, some of these people are incentivized, they're incentivized to have you buy a certain type of equipment. They're going to be incentivized for you to buy maybe more equipment than you really need when you start out or for a long time, which makes your startup costs greater. Again, it's going to put more pressure on you to generate revenue early on, which I don't like. I I would love it if you could be having fun running your business like me, not be stressed out about it all the time. And, I just bottom line wanted to create a learning environment that didn't have a conflict of interest. Again, any recommendation I made, it's because that's based on my experience. That's the viewpoint that I have. And, you can approach it one way or you can approach it differently. But, I would just want you to know that I'm not incentivized either way to tell you to buy a certain type of equipment or rent out a certain size space. So how long did it take you to get started from concept to opening day? Again, I guess maybe 10 years because it took me 10 years from when I started home brewing to when I actually opened a business. But let's see, I guess for me, it probably took when I actually applied to get my federally licensed. It actually took me about 9 months because there's a little bit of back and forth. It took me a little bit longer to get started than it should take you. I think it would only take, if I had to do it over again, I could easily get started up in like 4 months because I know how to fill out all the information now and what people are looking for. But, it probably took me about 9 months to actually open up the doors to the place from when I really actually truly got started moving forward with this. So with that being said, were actually all the main questions asked that weren't addressed during the class time. So for everyone that's still here, I just want to thank you once and again for your time and attention. Anyone that's still here, I know you are clearly committed to your success in this type of business, and I wish you the best in the future. As a reminder, I'm going to be sending out an email again with the deck and links to the resources that I mentioned during this class. Again, those of you that are ready to take the next step in the journey, I encourage you to register through the link below, and we'll be getting to know each other much better over the next few weeks and months. And this is going to be a truly transformational experience for many of you, and I can't wait to help start you on your journey. Thank you again for your time and attention. If you have any questions about the time, I've included my direct email address below. Otherwise, I encourage you to sign up for the class below, and I look forward to getting to know a lot of you shortly. So see you soon. Thanks a lot.